Mahatma Gandhi, A Life of Nonviolent Revolution. Part 1. Roots of a Revolutionary. Gandhi's early life and family background. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, who would later be revered as Mahatma, the Great Soul, was born on October 2, 1869, in the coastal town of Porbandar, situated in the Kathiawar Peninsula of present-day Gujarat, India. This modest town, part of a small princely state under British suzerainty, was steeped in tradition and hierarchy. It was here, amid the quiet streets and salt-laden sea breeze, that the seeds of an extraordinary life were sown. Gandhi was born into a Hindu family of the Modbanya caste, which belonged to the Vaishya Varna, or merchant class. His family traced their roots to the village of Kutiana, and though their economic standing was comfortable, it was not lavish. The Gandhis lived a life marked by duty, spiritual discipline, and adherence to social norms. Mohandas's father, Karamchand Gandhi, was a man of principle who rose through the administrative ranks to become Diwan Chief Minister of Porbandar state. Though Karamchand had little formal education and no advanced degrees, he was recognized for his sound judgment, unwavering loyalty, and administrative competence. His career as a Diwan spanned multiple princely states, including Porbandar and later Rajkot. During his tenure, he navigated the often complex world of princely politics under British colonial oversight. His reputation for integrity left a lasting impression on his son, who would, in his own life, hold truth as the highest ideal. Karamchand's personal life was marked by tragedy and resilience. He was married 4 times. His first 2 wives passed away young, each leaving behind a daughter. A third marriage ended without children. In 1857, with the consent of his third wife, he married once more. His fourth wife, Putlibai, was a deeply religious woman from the Pranami Vaishnava sect in Junagadh. It was a union that would bear 4 children. 3 sons, Laxmidas, Karsandas, and Mohandasand, 1 daughter, Raliatben. Mohandas was the youngest of them all. Putlibai was a towering figure in Gandhi's moral and spiritual upbringing. Her devotion to religious observance was total. She fasted frequently, prayed daily, and carried out rituals with unshakable discipline. Mohandas would often watch her in quiet reverence, absorbing the values she embodied. Later in life, Gandhi would attribute his commitment to truth, nonviolence, and discipline not only to the scriptures but also to the silent teachings of his mother. In 1874, when Mohandas was just 5 years old, his father was transferred to Rajkot to serve as a counselor to the ruler of that princely state. The family relocated there, and Rajkot, though smaller than Porbandar, offered greater political security due to the presence of a British political agency. Karamchand's brother Tulsidas replaced him as the Diwan of Porbandar. By 1876, Karamchand himself became Diwan of Rajkot. In 1881, the family moved into a residence that would later become iconic, Kaba Gandhi No Dello. This house in Rajkot is preserved today as a museum dedicated to the formative years of the Mahatma. Young Mohandas was not a particularly remarkable child by traditional standards. He was timid, shy, and often lost in thought. According to his sister Raliat, he was restless as Mercury, constantly playing and getting into minor mischief. One of his favorite childhood pastimes was twisting the ears of stray dogs, an act he would later look upon with regret in light of his evolving philosophy of compassion for all living beings. Yet beneath his playful exterior lay a tender, reflective soul. Gandhi was captivated by stories from Hindu epics, especially those of Shravana, the devoted son who cared for his blind parents, and King Harishchandra, who upheld truth even in the face of immense suffering. These stories, often recounted in devotional settings or read aloud at home, left a deep imprint on the young boy. Later in life, he would write in his autobiography that the tale of Harishchandra haunted him and that he must have acted Harishchandra to myself times without number. It was from these epics that Gandhi drew his earliest understanding of righteousness, truth, and sacrifice. Mohandas began his formal education at the age of 9 in a local school near his home in Rajkot. There, he studied basic subjects such as arithmetic, geography, history, and Gujarati. He was not a brilliant student, nor did he show a flair for the arts or sports. Rather, he was quiet, methodical, and deeply conscientious. At age 11, he entered Alfred High School in Rajkot, a step that exposed him to a more structured academic environment. Though still shy and withdrawn, Gandhi began to display a quiet perseverance that would come to define his later activism. When he was 13 years old, Mohandas entered into an arranged marriage with Kasturbai Makhanji Kapadia, who was a year older than him. Their marriage, like many in India at the time, followed the customs of early betrothal. Neither fully understood the responsibilities of married life. Gandhi later wrote that the marriage, though performed according to societal norms, distracted him from his studies and awakened in him desires that led to internal turmoil. He admitted with unflinching honesty to being jealous, possessive, and obsessed with physical intimacy during the early years of his marriage. These feelings, he believed, were rooted in ignorance and would later become subjects of personal reform through vows of celibacy and self-discipline. The year 1885 marked two profound losses for Gandhi. His father, Karamchand, passed away after a period of illness. Gandhi, only 16 at the time, had left his father's bedside to be with his wife Kasturba, and by the time he returned, his father had died. This moment left an enduring scar on Gandhi's conscience. To make matters worse, his first child, born that same year, died in infancy. These back-to-back tragedies stirred in Gandhi a growing sense of detachment from worldly pleasures and a deepening awareness of life's impermanence. Despite these personal upheavals, Gandhi completed his high school education in Ahmedabad in 1887 and briefly enrolled at Samaldas College in Bhavnagar. However, he found the coursework uninspiring and the environment stifling. He returned home within a few months, uncertain of what path to follow next. It was around this time that the idea of studying law in England was proposed. This suggestion, which would alter the course of Gandhi's life, came from a family friend and was supported by his older brother, Laxmidas. The decision to send Mohandas abroad was met with resistance from their caste elders, who feared he would abandon Hindu customs and lose his moral footing. Nevertheless, with a promise to his mother that he would abstain from meat, alcohol, and women, Gandhi prepared to leave Indian shores for the first time in 1888. Thus began the next chapter in Gandhi's remarkable journey, one that would take him from the quiet lanes of Rajkot to the bustling heart of the British Empire and ultimately transform him from a hesitant student into a formidable advocate for justice and truth. Part 2. Becoming a Barrister. Gandhi's formative years in London. In 1888, at the age of 18, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi left Indian shores for the first time, setting sail for England to study law. The journey was momentous not only because of the physical distance, but because of the cultural chasm he would soon encounter. For a young man raised in the traditional surroundings of Gujarat, where religion and ritual governed everyday life, the prospect of life in the industrial and imperial capital of the world was both daunting and exhilarating. Before departing, Gandhi made solemn promises to his mother, Putlabai, who had been deeply concerned about the moral risks her son might face in the West. She feared he would be seduced by meat, alcohol, and women, 3 taboos for their devout Hindu family. In response, Gandhi took a vow in her presence, reinforced by a local Jain monk, to abstain from all three during his time abroad. With this personal code firmly in place, he boarded a ship from Bombay, now Mumbai, on September 4, 1888, bound for the United Kingdom. His arrival in London marked the beginning of a significant transformation. Gandhi had come to enroll at the Inner Temple, one of the four inns of court that trained and licensed barristers in Britain. The young Indian student quickly discovered that London was not just a center of legal education, but a cultural melting pot, brimming with ideas, customs, and contradictions. He also learned that fitting in would not be easy. At first, Gandhi struggled with the dissonance between his Indian identity and the expectations of Victorian English society. His modest clothes and foreign mannerisms drew attention, sometimes ridicule. Determined to integrate, Gandhi attempted to embrace British customs. He took lessons in elocution to polish his English accent, enrolled in dancing classes, and purchased Western suits. He even tried to eat like the English, but found their food bland and unpalatable, particularly difficult due to his vow of vegetarianism. His dietary struggles inadvertently led him into one of the most formative social circles of his life. After several days of going hungry, he stumbled upon a vegetarian restaurant, and there discovered the London Vegetarian Society. Not only did he find a solution to his food dilemma, but also an intellectual refuge. Gandhi joined the society and soon became an active member of its executive committee. Here, he encountered people from various walks of life: liberal thinkers, theosophists, and ethical reformers, many of whom were sympathetic to spiritual and social movements in the East. Among these new acquaintances were members of the Theosophical Society, who encouraged Gandhi to study sacred texts, including the Bhagavad Gita, which he had never read seriously until then. He began to explore the text in both English and Sanskrit, and its philosophical tenets of selfless action, detachment, and moral duty left a lasting impression. Years later, Gandhi would refer to the Gita as his spiritual dictionary. Gandhi also forged a meaningful intellectual connection with British social reformers, such as Henry Salt, whose writings on vegetarianism and ethics reinforced Gandhi's belief in compassion as a social and personal virtue. Salt's work made a powerful case for vegetarianism, not merely as a dietary choice, but as a moral imperative. Under such influence, Gandhi began to view food as a gateway to ethical living, a view that would persist for the rest of his life. During this period, Gandhi also witnessed the labor unrest that plagued industrial Britain. One particularly eye-opening moment occurred during the 1889 dockworkers' strike, where poorly paid laborers demanded better wages and working conditions. Moved by the solidarity of the strikers and the moral leadership of Cardinal Manning, who helped negotiate peace, Gandhi visited the cardinal to express his gratitude. The experience introduced him to the idea of social justice as a practical and collective force, not merely a philosophical concept. However, not all was harmonious in his London experience. Gandhi faced cultural dissonance within his own community. His decision to travel abroad had already sparked tension back home among orthodox members of the Modbanya caste, who excommunicated him for crossing the Sian Act, considered impure by conservative standards. Gandhi ignored their judgment, but the sense of alienation and burden of expectation followed him throughout his time in England. Despite his initial struggles with social confidence, Gandhi gradually developed discipline and self-reliance. He lived modestly in Bayswater, read extensively, and focused diligently on his studies. He found the legal curriculum at Inner Temple rigorous but manageable. Gandhi was particularly drawn to Roman law and moral philosophy, which seemed to echo the ethical values he held dear. He passed his examinations with reasonable success and was called to the bar in June 1891, officially becoming a barrister at age 22. Shortly after completing his legal training, Gandhi prepared to return to India. As he packed his bags, a letter arrived with devastating news. His mother had passed away months earlier, but his family had chosen to withhold the news so as not to distract him from his studies. The revelation filled Gandhi with guilt and sorrow. It was a stark reminder of the personal sacrifices that often accompanied his pursuit of professional and moral growth. Gandhi returned to Bombay in the summer of 1891 with a sense of accomplishment but no clear direction. Though now qualified as a lawyer, he lacked the confidence to establish a successful practice. His first attempts at litigation were faltering. His shyness persisted, especially in courtrooms, where he struggled to cross-examine witnesses or speak with authority. He eventually left Bombay and settled in Rajkot, where he made a modest living drafting petitions for litigants. Even this was short-lived. After a dispute with a British official, Gandhi was barred from entering the local courtrooms, effectively ending his practice. This early phase of professional failure was disheartening. Gandhi was 23 years old, educated in England, fluent in English law, yet marginalized in his own country. It was in this moment of uncertainty that a new opportunity emerged on that would not only revive his career, but reshape his entire worldview. A Muslim merchant from Kathiawar, Dada Abdullah, who had a flourishing business in South Africa, needed legal assistance in a family dispute. The case offered Gandhi a year-long contract in the British colony of Natal, with travel expenses and a modest salary. He accepted, believing it would be a temporary assignment. In April 1893, Gandhi boarded a ship once more, this time bound for South Africa, unaware that the next 2 decades of his life would be spent there. It was a journey that would awaken in him a political conscience, introduce him to the brutality of racial discrimination, and set him on a lifelong path of resistance through nonviolence. Part 3. A Conscience Awakens. Gandhi's early activism in South Africa. When Mohandas Gandhi arrived in Durban, South Africa, in April 1893, he stepped into a world vastly different from the one he had known in either India or England. What began as a short-term legal assignment would soon transform into a 21-year struggle for justice, and South Africa would become the crucible in which Gandhi's political and ethical philosophies were forged. Gandhi had accepted a position to represent a wealthy Muslim merchant, Dada Abdullah, in a commercial dispute involving his cousin in Pretoria. At the time, South Africa was a patchwork of British colonies and Boer republics, and it was here that Gandhi, barely 24, would first confront institutionalized racism. Though technically a British subject and professionally a barrister, Gandhi soon realized that his identity as an Indian placed him on the lowest rung of South African society. The first jolt came during a train journey to Pretoria. Having purchased a first-class ticket, Gandhi was seated accordingly. However, a European passenger objected to sharing the carriage with a colored man. The conductor ordered Gandhi to move to third class. When he refused, insisting on his legal rights, he was physically thrown off the train at Pietermaritzburg station. It was a cold night. Shivering in the waiting room, Gandhi contemplated returning to India. But as he reflected on the injustice of his treatment, a new resolve began to stir within him. This moment, often described as the turning point in Gandhi's life, planted the seeds of a broader awakening. It was no longer just about winning a legal case, it was about confronting a system that degraded people based on race and origin. Over the following weeks, Gandhi encountered similar indignities. He was kicked off sidewalks, denied access to hotels, and asked to remove his turban in court. The repeated affronts ignited in him a moral outrage and a desire to resist not with violence, but with dignity and moral courage. The case that had brought him to South Africa was eventually resolved amicably, yet Gandhi was not ready to leave. He chose to stay, spurred by a new mission to help South Africa's Indian community who faced oppressive laws and deep social prejudice. Indians, many of whom were indentured laborers or small traders, were routinely denied voting rights, subject to humiliating pass laws, and frequently abused without legal recourse. Gandhi soon began organizing the community. In 1894, he founded the Natal Indian Congress, NIC, which would serve as the political platform through which he lobbied for Indian rights. Through petitions, public meetings, and correspondence with officials, Gandhi worked to unify the fragmented Indian population, Hindus and Muslims, laborers and merchants, into a cohesive political voice. The NIC's first major campaign was against a proposed bill in Natal's legislature that sought to disenfranchise Indians. Gandhi mobilized a petition campaign collecting over 10,000 signatures and sent appeals to officials in London. Though the bill passed, Gandhi's advocacy brought international attention to the plight of Indians in South Africa. It was a small but meaningful victory. The voice of a marginal community had been heard on the world stage. During these years, Gandhi began articulating the principles that would define his life. Central to this was the concept of Satyagraha, or truth force. This term would later come to represent Gandhi's entire philosophy of nonviolent resistance. For Gandhi, Satyagraha was not simply political defiance, it was a moral and spiritual discipline. It required those engaged in protest to purify their intentions, embrace suffering, and refuse to retaliate. Resistance, in Gandhi's vision, was a form of soul force, which would eventually awaken the conscience of the oppressor. By the turn of the century, Gandhi's role as a civil rights leader had grown substantially. When the Boer War broke out in 1899 between the British and the Dutch-descended Boers, Gandhi volunteered to organize an Indian ambulance corps. His hope was that by demonstrating loyalty and service, Indians might earn greater civil rights. Gandhi believed that ethical conduct must accompany political demands. Over 1,000 Indians served under his leadership, attending to wounded soldiers on the front lines, a contribution that was later recognized with medals from the British Empire. It was here that Satyagraha made its political debut. Gandhi urged people not to register, even if it meant arrest. He was the first to take the step, and he was jailed. Over the following years, thousands joined him in civil disobedience, burning registration cards, refusing to comply with discriminatory laws, and enduring imprisonment and beatings without retaliation. Gandhi's nonviolent resistance confounded the authorities. Used to quelling dissent with force, they found themselves facing a movement that refused to fight back. Meanwhile, Gandhi refined his own discipline. He began wearing simple clothes, adopted a vegetarian diet, and embraced celibacy. These were not just personal vows, they were symbolic rejections of excess and affirmations of inner strength. For Gandhi, personal transformation was inseparable from political action. In 1910, with the support of his German Jewish friend Hermann Kallenbach, Gandhi established Tolstoy Farm, a communal living experiment outside Johannesburg. Named after the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy, whose philosophy of Christian anarchism had greatly influenced Gandhi, the farm became a training ground for satyagrahismen and women committed to living ethically and resisting injustice through nonviolence. The community followed strict rules: shared labor, simple living, spiritual reflection, and a commitment to service. It was here that Gandhi trained many of his closest collaborators, instilling in them the values of discipline, equality, and fearlessness. Tolstoy Farm would later serve as a model for Gandhi's future ashrams in India. The campaign in South Africa continued through the early 1910s. Gandhi was arrested multiple times, beaten by police, and subjected to harsh treatment. But the movement endured, gaining strength with each sacrifice. Public opinion, both in South Africa and abroad, began to shift. In 1914, after years of struggle, the South African government agreed to some of Gandhi's key demands, including the repeal of the registration law and recognition of Indian marriages. Having achieved a partial but symbolic victory, Gandhi made preparations to return to India. He was now 45 years old. South Africa had changed him. The barrister from Rajkot had become a moral leader, political strategist, and philosopher of nonviolence. His methods had matured, and his message had resonated across borders. As he boarded the ship for Bombay, Gandhi left behind a legacy in South Africa. Legacy of courage, unity, and dignity in the face of oppression. But his greatest battles still lay ahead. India was calling, and with it came a new struggle. To liberate an entire nation, not through war, but through the power of truth. Part 4. Homeward Bound. Gandhi's return to India and the rise of a national leader. In January 1915, after spending over 2 decades in South Africa, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi returned to his homeland. He disembarked in Bombay, now Mumbai, not as a little-known barrister as he had once left it, but as an emerging moral authority, a seasoned leader who had demonstrated, through personal sacrifice and political ingenuity, that non-violent resistance could be a powerful tool for justice. Yet, for all the acclaim that preceded him, Gandhi's return was quiet and introspective. He came not as a triumphant revolutionary, but as a pilgrim eager to understand a homeland that had changed in his long absence. Gandhi was 45 years old when he set foot on Indian soil again. His appearance had also changed. Gone were the 3-piece suits of London and Durban. Instead, he now wore a simple white robe, sandals, and carried few possessions. These choices were not merely symbolic, they reflected the austere, disciplined life he had embraced at Tolstoy Farm and would soon cultivate even further. Before engaging in politics, Gandhi chose to travel extensively across India, observing its people, their suffering, their spirit, and the social and economic conditions that governed their daily lives. He journeyed by third-class train compartments, visited villages, stayed with farmers and laborers, and listened. For Gandhi, understanding India meant immersing himself among its poorest. He recognized early that India's soul lived not in the cities or elite drawing rooms, but in its countless villages. During this period, Gandhi avoided involvement in party politics. He declined to assume any leadership role immediately, preferring instead to act as a student of Indian society. He spent considerable time at the Sabarmati ashram in Gujarat, which he founded later in 1917, establishing it as a spiritual and communal base for his followers. At the ashram, life was governed by simplicity, self-sufficiency, and strict ethical discipline. Members engaged in manual labor, practiced prayer and meditation, and lived by the principles of truth, satya, and nonviolence, ahimsa. Though Gandhi had arrived as a respected figure, it was Gopal Krishna Gokhale, a veteran leader of the Indian National Congress and a moderate statesman, who formally introduced him into Indian political life. Gokhale recognized Gandhi's moral authority and foresaw the potential of his leadership. The two shared mutual respect, though their methods differed. Gokhale, a believer in constitutional reform and dialogue with the British, hoped Gandhi would bring a unifying and ethical force to the nationalist movement. Gandhi's first major engagement in Indian politics came in 1917 in the district of Champaran, Bihar. Here, thousands of tenant farmers were being coerced by British planters to grow indigo under exploitative contracts. Though the demand for indigo had plummeted, the landowners insisted on payment and enforced oppressive labor practices. The local peasants, impoverished and voiceless, appealed to Gandhi for help. Unlike traditional political agitators, Gandhi refused to act impulsively. Instead, he launched a methodical fact-finding mission, interviewing villagers and documenting abuses. He emphasized civil disobedience and not violent protest. Despite repeated orders from the authorities to leave the district, Gandhi refused. He was arrested. And then, in a move that shocked even colonial officials, the case against him was dropped. The British were unprepared for a man who challenged them not with weapons but with unyielding moral resolve. Gandhi's efforts led to significant reforms. The planters were forced to return portions of the money collected from the peasants, and the exploitative system was dismantled. More importantly, Gandhi had demonstrated that nonviolent resistance could yield tangible results. For the first time in India, peasants had defied British authority and won. Soon after Champaran, Gandhi became involved in a similar struggle in the Kedah district of Gujarat in 1918. That year, the region was devastated by floods and crop failures. Yet the colonial government insisted on collecting full land revenue. Gandhi once again stepped in, organizing a campaign of tax refusal and peaceful noncompliance. Farmers pledged to resist payment even under threat of land confiscation and imprisonment. Gandhi's leadership helped sustain morale and ensured that the protest remained peaceful. After months of tension, the British government relented. They suspended tax collection and released arrested protesters. Kedah reinforced Gandhi's belief in the power of collective action and moral firmness. It also marked the beginning of a political alliance with a rising local leader, Vallabhbhai Patel, who would go on to become one of Gandhi's closest collaborators. These early movements gave Gandhi credibility among India's masses. He was no longer just the barrister from England or the activist from South Africa. He was now Bapu Fatherland Mahatma, great soul to many Indians. Yet, Gandhi did not seek to be revered. He was wary of hero worship and continually reminded his followers that they must think and act independently. Gandhi's political philosophy began to evolve rapidly during this time. He saw India's struggle for independence not simply as a political quest, but as a moral and cultural awakening. Independence, or Swaraj, to him, was not merely about removing British rule, it was about self-rule in every aspect of life. It meant individual self-mastery, community-based self-reliance, and a rejection of material dependency on the West. He called upon Indians to embrace Swadeshi, the use of domestic goods, and boycott British products, particularly cloth. The hand-spun khadi cloth became a powerful symbol of resistance and national identity. Gandhi urged Indians of all backgrounds to spin their own yarn daily, a humble but revolutionary act that symbolized economic independence and solidarity with the rural poor. Equally important to Gandhi was his campaign against untouchability. Deeply disturbed by caste discrimination, he began advocating for the upliftment of those considered untouchables, whom he called Harijans, or Children of God. His efforts to include them in temple worship, education, and social equality challenged entrenched orthodoxies and faced stiff opposition from traditionalists. Nevertheless, Gandhi was steadfast. For him, India could not be truly free unless all its children were treated with dignity. By the end of the 1910s, Gandhi had begun to reshape Indian nationalism into a movement that was as much spiritual and cultural as it was political. He rejected hatred and violence, called for interfaith harmony, and insisted on personal responsibility as a foundation for national change. His approach was radically inclusive. He appealed to peasants, laborers, women, intellectuals, and religious minorities alike. His message was, clear India's freedom would be built from the bottom up. As the 1920s dawned, Gandhi was ready to lead the national movement. He had walked among the people, won their trust, and proven that truth and nonviolence were not just idealistic slogans, but potent instruments of change. In a land long fractured by divisions caste, creed, class, and language, he had offered a unifying vision, one of moral courage, self-reliance, and collective dignity. India, stirred by his message, was beginning to awaken. Part 5. The Rise of Civil Disobedience. Gandhi and the National Movement. As the 1920s began, Mahatma Gandhi stood at the helm of India's growing nationalist movement, not as a firebrand agitator, but as a moral force whose quiet strength could galvanize millions. The movements he had led in Champaran and Kedah had demonstrated that India's rural poor could be politically awakened through principled leadership. Now, the time had come to scale this awakening to the national level. In 1919, the political atmosphere in India was charged with both hope and betrayal. Many Indians had supported the British during World War I, believing that their loyalty would be rewarded with steps toward self-governance. But instead of reforms, the British introduced the Rowlatt Act, a draconian law that permitted imprisonment without trial, suspended civil liberties, and gave sweeping powers to the colonial police. It was seen as a betrayal of Indian aspirations. Gandhi's response to the Rowlatt Act was immediate. He called for a nationwide Hartala Day of fasting, prayer, and suspension of work as a peaceful form of protest. On April 6, 1919, India responded. Shops closed, streets emptied, and people of all religions gathered to express their collective resistance. It was one of the first times Gandhi's method of Satyagraha, or nonviolent resistance, was implemented on a truly national scale. However, the British response was brutal. The most horrifying example came on April 13, 1919, in Amritsar. Thousands had gathered at Jallianwala Bagh, a public square, for a peaceful meeting. Without warning or provocation, Brigadier General Reginald Dyer ordered his troops to open fire on the unarmed crowd, killing hundreds and injuring thousands. The massacre shocked India and reverberated across the world. Gandhi, deeply affected, saw it as a watershed moment. But while many Indians called for vengeance, Gandhi called for restraint. He condemned the violence but insisted that the response must be rooted in nonviolence. This discipline, he argued, was essential not just for moral reasons, but because it would unite Indians across divisions and expose the brutality of colonial rule to the world. In the aftermath, Gandhi intensified his efforts. He declared that British rule was sustained by Indian cooperation, and therefore, if Indians withdrew that cooperation, the empire would collapse. This idea became the foundation of the non-cooperation movement, which he launched formally in 1920. It was unlike anything India had seen before. The non-cooperation movement urged Indians to resign from government posts, boycott British courts and schools, return honors and titles awarded by the British, refuse to purchase foreign-made goods, particularly British textiles, promote khadi homespun cloths, a symbol of self-reliance and resistance. The campaign spread like wildfire. In cities and villages alike, people burned British clothes in bonfires, gave up government jobs, and refused to attend colonial institutions. Schools and universities led by nationalist educators sprang up. Gandhi toured the country tirelessly, spinning khadi in public meetings, encouraging every Indian rich or poor to do the same. But the movement was not without challenges. While Gandhi insisted on strict nonviolence, some segments of the population, inflamed by decades of repression, veered toward aggression. In February 1922, in the village of Chauri Chaura in present-day Uttar Pradesh, a peaceful protest escalated into violence. A mob attacked and burned a police station, killing 22 constables. Gandhi was devastated. He immediately called off the entire movement, declaring that India was not yet morally prepared for non-violent struggle on such a scale. This decision shocked his supporters. Many political leaders, including Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhas Chandra Bose, were frustrated that momentum had been lost. But Gandhi was unwavering. For him, The means were as important as the ends. Freedom won through violence, he believed, would only replicate the cycle of oppression. In March 1922, Gandhi was arrested by British authorities on charges of sedition. During his trial, Gandhi made a now famous statement, admitting to the charges and expressing no regret. "In my humble opinion," he said, "non-cooperation with evil is as much a duty as is cooperation with good." He was sentenced to 6 years in prison but was released in 1924 due to illness after serving only 2 years. During his imprisonment, the Indian National Congress, deprived of its central leader, saw internal divisions emerge. The party split between moderates who wanted to participate in legislative councils and radicals who continued to push for complete independence through mass action. Gandhi, upon his release, sought to unify the factions but declined to take up active political leadership. Instead, he focused on social reform, particularly the fight against untouchability. Gandhi had long believed that political freedom must be accompanied by moral and social reform. He argued that India could not be truly free unless it addressed its internal injustices, particularly the oppression of those labeled as untouchables. In 1925, he began a nationwide campaign to integrate them into temples, schools, and public spaces, referring to them with the respectful term Harijans, or Children of God. This initiative sparked fierce resistance. Orthodox Hindu leaders accused Gandhi of diluting religious traditions, while Dalit leaders like B.R. Ambedkar criticized Gandhi for not going far enough. Ambedkar wanted the complete eradication of the caste system and legal safeguards for Dalits, while Gandhi emphasized spiritual reform and social unity. Though their approaches differed, both men highlighted the deep moral crisis within Indian society. Throughout the mid-1920s, Gandhi also addressed other pressing issues: the need for rural development, women's participation in the freedom movement, and Hindu-Muslim unity. He championed economic self-reliance by promoting village industries and simple living. He began practicing longer fasts, both as acts of personal purification and as political instruments to awaken public conscience. Gandhi's influence continued to grow. Though no longer the official head of the Congress, he remained its moral compass. His philosophy of nonviolence had captured the imagination of millions. He had transformed Indian nationalism from an elite-led movement into a mass phenomenon rooted in villages, simplicity, and moral courage. As India approached the end of the decade, a new urgency gripped the nation. The British had shown no intention of granting dominion status, let alone independence. In response, Gandhi and his colleagues prepared to escalate their demands. A new campaign was taking shape that would target the very economic foundations of British colonial rule. It would come to be known as the Salt Satyagraha, and it would elevate Gandhi's philosophy of resistance to a global stage. But in the rising storm of protest, Gandhi remained steadfast in his faith that India would find its freedom not through hatred, but through the strength of the soul. Part 6. The Salt March. Defying empire with a handful of salt. By the end of the 1920s, India's struggle for independence had reached a decisive phase. After years of petitions, peaceful resistance, and internal political negotiation, the British Empire had shown little willingness to concede real power. Amid rising discontent, Mahatma Gandhi prepared to launch a new campaign that would target not simply a law, but the very legitimacy of British authority in India. That campaign began with an unlikely but potent symbol, salt. Salt was a basic necessity of life used by rich and poor alike. Yet under British colonial law, Indians were forbidden from collecting or producing it on their own. Instead, they were forced to buy heavily taxed salt from government depots. This monopoly affected every Indian, especially the poor, and Gandhi saw in it a perfect symbol of colonial injustice, oppressive, pervasive, and absurd. In December 1929, at the annual session of the Indian National Congress in Lahore, the party officially adopted Purna Swaraj, or complete independence, as its goal. January 26, 1930 was celebrated across India as Independence Day, marked by the hoisting of the national flag and pledges of nonviolent resistance. Yet the real mass mobilization would begin 2 months later, on a hot morning in March, when Gandhi set out on what would become the most iconic protest march of modern history. On March 12, 1930, at dawn, Gandhi left the Sabarmati ashram near Ahmedabad with 78 hand-picked followers, mostly volunteers trained in nonviolent discipline. The plan: to march 240 miles south to the coastal village of Dandi, where he would symbolically break the salt law by collecting natural salt from the seashore. For Gandhi, this was not just a political protest, it was a spiritual pilgrimage. Along the way, he would educate, inspire, and mobilize ordinary Indians. The march captured the nation's imagination. As Gandhi and his followers moved from village to village, thousands joined them. Men and women walked for hours, often barefoot, braving the sun and dust. Gandhi spoke at each stop about Swaraj, self-reliance, the injustice of British rule, and the moral power of ahimsa. He encouraged villagers to boycott foreign cloth, spin their own khadi, and prepare for peaceful protest. Newspapers around the world began to follow the journey with increasing fascination. After 24 days, on April 6, 1930, Gandhi reached the Arabian Sea at Dandi. Dressed in his simple white cloth, he walked into the shallow waters, bent down, and lifted a lump of salty mud. He let it dry and then held it aloft. In doing so, he had broken the law deliberately, peacefully, and with profound symbolism. It was an act that resonated far beyond the shores of Gujarat. The Salt March set off a tidal wave of civil disobedience across India. In towns and villages, thousands of people defied the salt laws. They made salt from seawater, sold it in open defiance, and courted arrest. Gandhi's call for mass Satyagraha had struck a chord. For the first time, vast numbers of ordinary Indian peasants, students, housewives took part in a coordinated, non-violent revolt. The British response was swift and harsh. Protesters were beaten, imprisoned, and sometimes killed. Police raided villages, seized property, and lashed out violently. But the Satyagrahis, trained in nonviolence, did not retaliate. Their suffering exposed the brutality of the colonial regime and won global sympathy. One particularly symbolic protest took place in May 1930 at Darasana, a government salt works in Gujarat. Gandhi had planned to lead the raid himself, but he was arrested shortly after the Dandi protest. In his absence, leadership passed to figures like Sarojini Naidu and Abbas Tayabji. When the volunteers attempted to peacefully enter the salt depot, British soldiers met them with iron-tipped lathis, batons. American journalist Webb Miller, who witnessed the scene, described the volunteers marching in silence, being clubbed to the ground, and then replaced by others without a word of retaliation. His report, published in international newspapers, horrified readers and sparked condemnation of British rule. The Salt Satyagraha became a turning point, not just in India's freedom struggle, but in the global history of nonviolent resistance. Gandhi had taken a simple act and infused it with moral clarity. He had shown that nonviolence was not passive, it was dynamic, disciplined, and powerful. By challenging the salt law, he'd also challenged the moral legitimacy of the British Empire. The world took notice. More than 60 Indians were arrested during the campaign, including most Congress leaders. Jails were overcrowded, yet the movement did not lose steam. Gandhi's imprisonment only intensified public support. Around this time, British authorities realized that suppressing Gandhi was not a solution, it merely amplified his message. In early 1931, Gandhi was released from prison and invited to negotiate with the British Viceroy, Lord Irwin. The result was the Gandhi-Irwin Pact, signed in March 1931. According to the agreement, Gandhi agreed to suspend the civil disobedience campaign, and in return, the British would release political prisoners and allow peaceful use of salt by coastal communities. Though the pact fell short of full independence, it marked a significant recognition of Gandhi's status as the de facto leader of India's nationalist movement. Later that year, Gandhi traveled to London to attend the Second Round Table Conference, a meeting convened by the British government to discuss constitutional reforms in India. Arriving as the sole representative of the Indian National Congress, Gandhi became a global figure. Clad in his simple dhoti, he addressed industrialists, intellectuals, and politicians with quiet confidence. Though the conference yielded few tangible results, Gandhi's dignity and moral conviction left a deep impression on the British public. His trip to England also included a visit to working-class neighborhoods, where he expressed solidarity with the poor and emphasized his vision of Swaraj as a movement not just for political freedom, but for economic and social justice. He stayed with ordinary people, declined luxuries, and reminded the world that India's soul lay not in its elite but in its villages. Upon returning to India in December 1931, Gandhi found a deteriorating political landscape. The pact with the British was unraveling. Civil disobedience resumed, and Gandhi was again arrested. Throughout the early 1930s, the colonial government continued its policy of repression. Gandhi responded with fasts, peaceful protest, and unrelenting moral pressure. The Salt March had changed India's independence struggle irreversibly. No longer was it confined to elites, and intellectual Sikh had become a people's movement. It had created an unprecedented moral challenge to colonialism. Most importantly, it had transformed Gandhi from a national leader into a global symbol of resistance, admired by figures as diverse as Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., and John Ruskin's followers. By the mid-1930s, the British Empire knew it could no longer rule India without reckoning with Gandhi's movement. Yet the path ahead was still uncertain. The next decade would bring more upheaval, communal tensions, war, and the final battle for independence. But in that single handful of salt, Gandhi had done more than break a law, had awakened a nation. Part 7. War and Division, Gandhi, World War II, and the Quit India Movement. As the 1930s gave way to the 1940s, the Indian struggle for independence found itself intersecting with a much larger global conflict, World War II. With Europe descending into chaos and the British Empire thrown into its gravest crisis in generations, Mahatma Gandhi and the Indian National Congress saw both danger and opportunity. The war posed moral dilemmas and strategic challenges for Gandhi, whose principles of nonviolence stood in stark contrast to the violence engulfing the world. When Britain declared war on Nazi Germany in September 1939, it did so on behalf of the entire British Empire, including India, without consulting any Indian leaders or institutions. This unilateral move angered the Congress, which demanded that India's participation in the war must be contingent upon a clear commitment to Indian independence. Gandhi, too, objected to India's involvement without consent, calling it undemocratic and morally unacceptable. Gandhi's position, however, was nuanced. Though he considered Adolf Hitler and fascism as embodiments of evil and acknowledged the threat they posed to humanity, he did not support violent war as a means to combat that evil. His letters to Hitler, too, of which survive, were polite but direct appeals to conscience, urging the dictator to abandon violence. Gandhi believed that even in the face of tyranny, nonviolence must remain the path. Within India, the political climate was shifting. The Congress ministries, which had been elected in various provinces under the 1935 Government of India Act, resigned in protest in 1939, withdrawing from cooperation with the colonial government. This created a political vacuum that was quickly filled by the Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, which began positioning itself as the sole representative of India's Muslim population. Communal tensions, simmering for years, now gained new political expression. Gandhi, concerned by the deepening Hindu-Muslim divide, intensified his efforts to promote communal harmony. He held meetings with Jinnah, appealing to shared values and joint action for independence. But the two leaders, despite mutual respect, remained fundamentally at odds. Gandhi envisioned a united, secular India, where all religions coexisted. Jinnah, however, increasingly saw the Muslim community as a separate nation entitled to its own homeland, an idea that would eventually evolve into the demand for Pakistan. Meanwhile, the British government, under increasing pressure at home and abroad, made half-hearted attempts to win Indian support for the war. In 1942, British Minister Sir Stafford Cripps arrived in India with a proposal. India would be granted dominion status after the war, and provinces could choose to opt out of the Union if they wished. The plan, vague and non-committal, satisfied neither Congress nor the League. Gandhi famously dismissed the offer as a post-dated check on a crashing bank. Frustrated by British intransigence and alarmed by the rapid advance of Japanese forces in Asia, including their occupation of Burma, now Myanmar, Gandhi concluded that the time had come for a decisive national uprising. He believed that continued subjugation under the British endangered not just India's political rights, but its very survival. Thus, in August 1942, at a historic meeting in Bombay, the Indian National Congress passed the Quit India Resolution, calling for an immediate end to British rule. On August 8, 1942, Gandhi addressed the nation with a powerful and simple message: do or die. It was not a call for violence, but a call for absolute, unwavering, non-violent resistance. Indians were urged to act as if they were already free, to take control of their own destinies, and to defy the British peacefully, yet boldly. The British response was immediate and severe. Within hours, Gandhi, Jawaharlal, Nehru, Sardar Patel, and almost the entire Congress leadership were arrested. Gandhi was taken to the Aga Khan Palace in Pune and held in detention for over 2 years, along with his wife, Kasturba, and his secretary, Mahadev Desai. With its leadership behind bars, the Quit India movement became a spontaneous, decentralized rebellion. Across the country, people protested, struck work, sabotaged communication lines, and confronted police forces. The British cracked down with ruthless efficiency. Over 100 Indians were arrested, and thousands were killed in police firings and beatings. Entire towns were placed under martial law. During Gandhi's imprisonment, tragedy struck. Mahadev Desai died of a heart attack shortly after their internment. Then, in February 1944, Kasturba Gandhi passed away in Gandhi's arms after a prolonged illness. Gandhi, heartbroken but composed, remained in detention. His own health deteriorated, and in May 1944, fearing his death would provoke national unrest, the British released him. Though the Quit India movement did not achieve immediate political concessions, it marked a turning point in the independence struggle. It sent a clear signal to the British that their rule in India was no longer tenable. For the first time, the demand for full and immediate independence had become a national consensus. It also demonstrated the power of civil resistance even in the absence of centralized leadership, a testament to Gandhi's years of grassroots mobilization. The war ended in 1945, with Britain victorious but exhausted. Its empire, stretched thin across continents, was no longer economically or politically sustainable. In India, elections were held in 1946, and the Congress won majorities in most provinces. Yet, communal divisions had deepened, and Jinnah's Muslim League, which had gained considerable support, now demanded a separate nation. Gandhi, though aging and frail, threw himself into efforts to prevent partition. He traveled through riot-torn areas in Bengal, Bihar, and Punjab, urging Hindus and Muslims to embrace peace. He fasted repeatedly to stop violence, often risking his life. His message remained consistent. India must be free, but it must also be united both politically and spiritually. Despite his pleas, the tide of history proved unstoppable. The British, desperate to exit India, hurried the transfer of power. In June 1947, it was announced that India would be partitioned into two independent dominions, India and Pakistan. Gandhi opposed the partition to the very end, calling it a vivisection of my own body. But with Congress leaders like Nehru and Patel accepting it as a necessary compromise to avoid civil war, Gandhi stood alone. As the final days of British rule approached, Gandhi remained in Bengal, refusing to participate in the official independence celebrations. He spent August 15, 1947, not in Delhi amid jubilation, but in Kolkata, fasting to quell Hindu-Muslim violence. His absence from the national capital on the Day of Freedom was not just symbolic, it was a moral statement. For Gandhi, political freedom meant nothing if it came at the cost of national unity and human suffering. By the end of 1947, Gandhi was 78 years old. India was independent, but the subcontinent was bloodied by partition. Over 1 million people had died in the violence. Millions more were displaced. Gandhi, though deeply pained, remained committed to healing the wounds. His final chapter was yet to be written. Part 8. The Final Days. Gandhi's Assassination and Legacy. As India stepped into the light of independence in August 1947, the nation that Mahatma Gandhi had worked so tirelessly to free was also a nation deeply scarred. The joy of liberation was dimmed by the bloodshed of partition, which divided British India into the sovereign states of India and Pakistan. The trauma was vast and unimaginable. More than 1 million people perished in communal riots, and over 15 million were displaced, forced across borders drawn not by history, but by haste and politics. Gandhi, who had spent his life preaching ahimsa, nonviolence, and Hindu-Muslim unity, was devastated. While political leaders in Delhi prepared to raise the national flag and form the first independent Indian government, Gandhi chose instead to be in Kolkata, then Calcutta, a city on the edge of communal implosion. Refusing to attend the official independence celebrations, he fasted and prayed, hoping his presence would act as a calming influence. In Kolkata, something remarkable happened. Despite the surrounding turbulence, the city remained peaceful while Gandhi was present. Hindus and Muslims who had previously been at each other's throats were moved by Gandhi's example and restrained their violence. Leaders like Hussain Shahid Suhrawardy, a Muslim League politician and former Prime Minister of Bengal, even joined Gandhi in his peace marches. This was perhaps Gandhi's most profound act of post-independence leadership, healing a city not with laws or speeches, but with moral presence and personal sacrifice. But elsewhere, the violence continued. The western frontier, Especially Punjab saw horrific massacres as Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims fled across the new border. Gandhi, now 78, undertook a series of arduous journeys through affected regions, hoping to broker peace, encourage forgiveness, and stem the flow of hatred. His message was consistent. An eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. Even as India's leaders consolidated political power, Gandhi distanced himself from statecraft. He had always believed that Swaraj, self-rule, was more than just political independence. It was moral regeneration, social harmony, and personal responsibility. For Gandhi, real freedom meant rebuilding India from its villages, empowering the marginalized, and living simply. Back in Delhi in early 1948, Gandhi stayed at Birla House, where he held daily evening prayer meetings. These gatherings, open to people of all faiths, became spaces of reflection, moral clarity, and spiritual unity. Each evening, Gandhi would walk slowly from his room to the prayer ground, supported by aides, speaking softly to those who approached him with questions or burdens. Yet beneath the calm exterior, dangers were mounting. Many Hindus, particularly Hindu nationalists, were deeply angered by Gandhi's continued insistence on Hindu-Muslim reconciliation. To them, his opposition to partition, his support for Pakistan's financial claims, and his overtures to Muslim communities felt like betrayal. One such group was the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, a right-wing Hindu nationalist organization that viewed Gandhi's ideology as weak and dangerous to the emerging Hindu identity of India. Among the radicals stirred by this resentment was a young man named Nathuram Godse, former RSS member, editor of a nationalist newspaper, and fierce critic of Gandhi's conciliatory politics. Convinced that Gandhi was enabling the enemy and weakening Hindu India, Godse began plotting the assassination of the Mahatma. On January 30, 1948, Gandhi's day followed a routine: prayer, spinning khadi, meeting visitors, and discussing matters of national and spiritual import. At around 5:10 p.m., he emerged from his room at Birla House, walking slowly toward the prayer ground. A crowd had gathered, as always, to hear his words. As he walked with his customary calm, Nathuram Godse approached him, folded his hands in a gesture of respect, then suddenly stepped forward and fired 3 bullets into Gandhi's chest at point-blank range. Gandhi collapsed, reportedly whispering, "Hey Ram, a prayer to Lord Ramas, life left his body." The news stunned the world. India wept. Leaders from every community, including those who had once opposed him, mourned the loss. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first Prime Minister, addressed the nation in a choked voice. "The light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere." In the hours and days that followed, millions of Indians took to the streets in mourning. Gandhi's body was placed on a bier and taken through the streets of Delhi in a funeral procession attended by more than 1 million people. His cremation, held at the Raj Ghat, marked the end of an era but not the end of his influence. Godse was arrested immediately, along with several co-conspirators. At his trial, he expressed no remorse. He claimed he had killed Gandhi to protect India from further weakening. His statement shocked the nation, but it also led to a wider examination of the ideological hatred that had been festering beneath the surface. The RSS was temporarily banned, and Hindu nationalist groups were scrutinized more closely. But Gandhi's death raised deeper questions. Could the nonviolence he had preached survive in a world so frequently ruled by fear, ambition, and prejudice? Could his moral vision live beyond him? For many, the answer came in the enduring impact of his life, rather than the tragedy of his death. Across the world, Gandhi became an enduring symbol of resistance without hatred. His influence transcended national boundaries. Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States studied Gandhi's methods and applied them to the civil rights movement, proving that nonviolence could dismantle systemic racism. Nelson Mandela drew upon Gandhi's legacy during his long struggle against apartheid in South Africa, where Gandhi had first discovered his political conscience. Figures like Cesar Chavez, Aung San Suu Kyi, and the Dalai Lama invoked Gandhi's principles in their own battles for justice. In India, Gandhi's ideas continued to challenge and inspire. His emphasis on rural self-sufficiency, communal harmony, and ethical leadership found echoes in future social reform movements. His writings, including Hind Swaraj, his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, and countless speeches and letters, became texts of conscience for generations to come. Yet Gandhi's legacy in India remains complex. While officially revered as the father of the nation, his vision for a decentralized, non-industrial, ethically grounded India diverged from the development path chosen by Nehru's modernist government. Over time, Gandhi's economic and social ideals were sidelined in favor of rapid industrialization and centralized planning. Despite this, his moral authority remains unmatched. His image adorns Indian currency. His birth date, October 20, is observed as Gandhi Jayanti, a national holiday and a day of non-violence observed by the United Nations worldwide. Statues of Gandhi stand not only in Indian cities but in capitals around the world. More than anything, Gandhi's legacy lies in the idea that a single person, guided by truth, compassion, and unflinching courage, can challenge empires and change the course of history without ever raising a weapon. He lived not to be worshipped, but to awaken the conscience of a sleeping world. Part 9. The Philosophy of Gandhi, Truth, Nonviolence, and the Power of the Soul. While Mahatma Gandhi is most often remembered for leading India's nonviolent struggle against British colonial rule, his legacy reaches far beyond political activism. At the heart of his life was a moral and spiritual vision shaped by ancient scriptures, global thinkers, personal struggle, and tireless introspection. Gandhi was not merely a revolutionary. He was a philosopher of action, a seeker of truth, and a relentless experimenter with the inner workings of the human soul. The cornerstone of Gandhi's philosophy was Truthor Satya, a Sanskrit term that implies not only factual accuracy, but alignment with eternal, moral reality. For Gandhi, truth was not static. It was something to be pursued, discovered, and experienced. He once wrote, "Truth is God." Over time, he refined that idea further, suggesting that truth and God were one and the same, and that the pursuit of truth was the highest duty of a human being. Gandhi's understanding of truth was not abstract. It was practical. He believed that truth must be lived through word, action, and intent. And because the truth was often difficult, inconvenient, or even dangerous, its pursuit required extraordinary discipline and courage. In Gandhi's view, any compromise on truth, even for strategic or political gain, was a betrayal of the soul. Hand in hand with truth came ahimsa, or non-violence. Often mistaken for passivity or inaction, Gandhi's nonviolence was dynamic and radical. It was not the absence of violence, but the active refusal to harm another physically, mentally, or spiritually. He saw violence not only in weapons, but in words, thoughts, and economic systems that oppressed the weak. Gandhi's ahimsa was both personal and political. On the personal level, it demanded control over anger, pride, and desire. It required forgiveness and compassion, even toward one's enemies. On the political level, it demanded resistance to injustice. Through Satyagraha term he coined that means truth, force, or soul force. Satyagraha was not simply civil disobedience. It was a way of life, a form of activism that sought to change hearts, not just laws. A core tenet of Satyagraha was the idea of voluntary suffering. Gandhi believed that willingly accepting suffering for a just cause could purify the self and appeal to the conscience of the oppressor. In this way, nonviolence became not weakness, but moral strength, a tool that demanded fearlessness and integrity. Through hunger strikes, prison sentences, and rejection of material comforts, Gandhi demonstrated how suffering could become a powerful act of resistance. His lifelong quest for truth and nonviolence was documented in his famous autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. Unlike conventional autobiographies, Gandhi's narrative did not glorify achievements or dramatic events. Instead, it chronicled his moral evolution, his struggles with fear, temptation, and self-doubt. He wrote candidly about his mistakes, stealing as a child, feelings of jealousy, and failures in parenting and marriage. For Gandhi, life itself was an experiment, and every day was a laboratory for testing ethical principles. Gandhi's commitment to self-discipline was legendary. He practiced brahmacharya celibacy not only in the physical sense but as a broader principle of self-control. He believed in minimizing desires, reducing dependency, and purifying the body and mind. He fasted regularly, not only as a political tool, but also as a means of spiritual cleansing. Food, clothing, speech, and even thoughts were regulated according to ethical principles. His famous spinning of the charkha, spinning wheel, symbolized self-reliance, but also served as a meditative practice. His economic philosophy, often dismissed by modernists as utopian or regressive, was grounded in ethical economics. Gandhi rejected industrialization if it came at the cost of human dignity, environmental harmony, or rural livelihoods. He championed village industries, handicrafts, and decentralized production. He believed that true development must empower the poorest and preserve the earth, not just increase wealth. In his vision, economic activity was not separate from morality, it was a sacred duty. Another essential aspect of Gandhi's philosophy was his belief in religious pluralism. Though a deeply devout Hindu, Gandhi believed that all religions were different paths to the same divine truth. He read the Bible, Quran, Bhagavad Gita, and Buddhist scriptures, and often drew inspiration from each. He held prayer meetings that included hymns from multiple faiths and frequently quoted sacred texts across traditions. His respect for other religions, however, did not blind him to their flaws. Gandhi challenged superstition, ritualism, and sectarian dogma in all religions, including Hinduism. He criticized the caste system, fought untouchability, and advocated for equal rights for all. To him, true religion was not about dogma, but about service, humility, and love. In politics, Gandhi's philosophy was revolutionary. He redefined leadership not as command but as service, seva. He rejected power for its own sake and often walked away from positions of authority. He demanded accountability not just from the British, but from his own followers. His model of leadership was participatory, ethical, and deeply human. Even in his interactions with opponents, Gandhi's approach was unique. He never demonized his adversaries, even when they imprisoned or attacked him. He believed in confronting the sin, not the sinner. His goal was not to destroy his opponents, but to awaken their conscience. This approach frustrated many, even within the Indian National Congress, who wanted more aggressive confrontation. But Gandhi remained unwavering. Victory achieved through hate was no victory at all. Gandhi also had a deep concern for education. He believed that modern education, with its emphasis on rote learning and colonial values, had alienated Indians from their roots. He advocated for Nai Talim, or basic education, where learning would be connected to manual work, ethical development, and local culture. Education, for Gandhi, was not just about literacy, it was about character. In his final years, Gandhi's philosophy remained remarkably consistent, even as the political world around him changed rapidly. He continued to advocate for self-purification, constructive work, and peace-building in riot-torn communities. When independence came in 1947, and the political class moved towards state-building, Gandhi remained focused on nation-building from the bottom up. His critics often accused him of being impractical, idealistic, or out of touch with modern realities. But his supporters and history recognized the profound power of his vision. He had transformed nonviolence from a passive stance into an active force, from a personal virtue into a collective strategy. He had shown that moral courage could defeat empires, and that the human soul, if disciplined and fearless, could bend even the harshest political systems toward justice. Long after his death, Gandhi's philosophy continues to resonate. It speaks to activists fighting for climate justice, social equity, indigenous rights, and democratic freedoms. His principles offer a compass in times of polarization, violence, and dehumanization. Gandhi never claimed perfection, but through his life and ideas, he offered a mappa way forward, not only for political movements, but for every human being seeking meaning, truth, and peace. Part 10. Gandhi in the Modern World. A Legacy of Conscience. More than 75 years after his death, Mahatma Gandhi remains one of the most iconic and influential figures of modern history. His life, rooted in the principles of nonviolence, truth, simplicity, and service, continues to inspire leaders, activists, thinkers, and ordinary people across continents. Yet, Gandhi's legacy is not merely confined to textbooks, statues, or commemorations. It is a living, force-tested, interpreted, and revived across generations in struggles both large and small. In the decades following his assassination in 1948, the world underwent immense transformations. Decolonization, the Cold War, civil rights movements, the rise of technology, economic globalization, and now, climate crisis and democratic uncertainty. Amid these sweeping changes, Gandhi's philosophy has served as an enduring beacon, a reminder that power can be confronted by conscience, and that political change must be accompanied by inner transformation. Perhaps the most visible global embodiment of Gandhi's methods appeared in America's civil rights movement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., deeply inspired by Gandhi's writings and strategies, adopted nonviolent resistance as the foundation of his campaign against racial segregation and inequality. King called Gandhi the guiding light of our technique of nonviolent social change. Sit-ins, boycotts, peaceful marches, and King's willingness to suffer for the cause of justice echoed the very soul force that Gandhi had practiced in India. Similarly, in South Africa, the struggle against apartheid found inspiration in Gandhi's early activism. Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison for resisting racial oppression, repeatedly acknowledged Gandhi's influence, noting how his legacy reminded South Africans that justice could be pursued with dignity and moral courage. Although Mandela ultimately sanctioned armed resistance, the spirit of Gandhi remained central to his vision of reconciliation and healing. Gandhi's impact extended to Latin America, where reformers like Cesar Chavez led peaceful campaigns for farm workers' rights, to Myanmar, where Aung San Suu Kyi cited Gandhi in her long nonviolent struggle for democracy, albeit later clouded by controversy, and to Tibet, where the Dalai Lama has repeatedly invoked Gandhi in his plea for autonomy through peace. Even in recent decades, movements such as Occupy Wall Street, Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, and various pro-democracy protests have referenced Gandhi's methods, especially his ideas on civil disobedience, voluntary suffering, and moral pressure. In an age of digital activism, where public attention is often fragmented, Gandhi's legacy serves as a counterweight reminding the world that real change is patient, principled, and deeply personal. In India, Gandhi's influence has remained both profound and paradoxical. Officially, he is venerated as the father of the nation. His birthday, October 2, is observed as a national holiday and recognized by the United Nations as the International Day of Nonviolence. His face appears on every Indian banknote, and his name adorns streets, institutions, and awards. Yet, the spirit of his philosophy often clashes with the reality of Indian politics and society. While successive governments have invoked his name, few have embraced his radical simplicity, ethical economics, or call for social equality with the same fervor. In a nation marked by rapid industrialization, political polarization, caste violence, and communal tension, Gandhi's teachings have been both embraced and ignored, celebrated and sidelined. One of the most contentious areas of Gandhi's legacy in India is his relationship with Dalits, formerly known as untouchables. While Gandhi worked tirelessly to uplift this community, referred to them as Harijans, children of God, and sought to eradicate untouchability, many Dalit thinkers and leaders, including B.R. Ambedkar, criticized Gandhi for not going far enough. Ambedkar, the chief architect of India's constitution, advocated for the annihilation of caste and rejected what he saw as Gandhi's sentimentalism toward the Hindu order. This divergence points to a deeper truth. Gandhi's legacy is not monolithic. It is debated, revised, and challenged, a sign that it is alive. True legacies evolve. They invite dialogue, not dogma. Another sphere where Gandhi's ideas have found renewed relevance is in the environmental movement. His warnings against unrestrained industrialization, his promotion of self-sufficient rural economies, and his mantra, "Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed," have taken on new urgency in an age of climate crisis. Gandhi's principle of simple living is being re-examined as a philosophical foundation for sustainable development and ecological ethics. In the world of education, Gandhi's model of Nai Talim, basic education, is experiencing revival through grassroots experiments in India and beyond. Educators committed to holistic, skills-based, community-integrated learning are finding renewed inspiration in Gandhi's vision known, where learning is tied to labor, ethics, and self-discovery. Perhaps the most urgent relevance of Gandhi's philosophy today lies in his model of leadership. In an era dominated by populism, polarization, and power politics, Gandhi stands as a reminder that true leadership is not about domination or spectacle, but service, humility, and moral consistency. Gandhi led not through charisma alone, but by aligning every aspect of his life, personal habits, public decisions, and political actions with his deepest values. He was not perfect. He admitted as much and invited critique. He struggled with doubts, made mistakes, and changed his views over time. Yet this human vulnerability was not a weakness, it was his strength. Gandhi's greatness lay not in being flawless, but in being fearlessly honest with himself, and in striving continuously to close the gap between his ideals and his reality. The tools Gandhi left the world are still nonviolence, Satyagraha, constructive work, moral clarity, courage without hatred. These tools are not limited to the battlefield of independence movements. They belong in our daily lives, in how we resolve conflict, how we treat others, how we consume, how we lead, how we listen, and how we live with integrity. As long as people seek justice without vengeance, as long as they speak truth to power without resorting to violence, as long as they build communities rooted in compassion and conscience, Gandhi lives. He once said, "You may never know what results come of your actions, but if you do nothing, there will be no result." His was a life that proved the transformative power of doing something honest, something humble, something rooted in truth, and in that, his revolution continues.